Hello, BookTube, and here's part 20 of my ongoing science fiction series. And I'm still working through the books that I received back from Canada, sort of old friends united. Now, uh, I have shown a couple of these books already, but I'm grouping together an author and editor. And his name is Sam Moskowitz. He was born in 1920 and he died in 1997. He in the 30s he was big part in his teenage years of science fiction fandom, and um, he helped create a sort of I think it was like science fiction league, I believe it was, and also too he was instrumental in getting the first international world science fiction convention, which at that point world meant the United States basically only, but it has developed since then. There was a big rivalry between his group and the Futurians that was created by Donald A. Wollheim, and that included Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, and they were apparently excluded from the first world's science fiction convention. Um, I don't know the full story with this. Sam Moskowitz wrote a history of 1930s fandom, probably his own group, called the Immortal Storm. I wasn't quite sure what the name was in my last video, but it was the Immortal Storm, and it was published by Advent Books. But we'll start out with some of his edited books. Here's one that's kind of, I think this is one of his first edited books put together. It's Editor's Choice in Science Fiction. It's compiled by Sam Moskowitz. It is 1954. And instead of him choosing all the stories, he went to the editors of magazines um, and asked them to give representative or great stories. I'll just read from the flap here. All of the anthologies which have so far appeared in the growing and absorbing field of science fiction have been the choice of a single editor. They have thus represented but one viewpoint and have been chosen at second hand for published materials. In editor's choice, the selection has been made by the primary authorities, the magazine editors themselves, the men who chose the stories from the multitude of typescripts which pass over their desks, and who thus stake their reputations and success of their magazines on their judgment. There's 12 editors here, and the 12 leading magazines publishing science fiction chosen from their files. Now, it's by the McBride Company. I forgot to say that, and it's dedicated to Hugo Gernsback. And there's sort of like almost like a couplet, not a couplet, but three lines of poetry. Who created the term science fiction? Who published the first science fiction magazine? Who established the basic principles of modern science fiction? This book is affectionately dedicated. Now that's a contentious remarks. Many people have argued against all that, but that's a different matter. Now, let's see here. We got uh, yeah. There's also Amazing Stories, Blue Book, Astounding, Thrilling Wonder Stories, Super Science Stories, Unknown, Astonishing Stories, Wonder Stories, Weird Tales, Science Fiction Plus, Famous Fantastic Mysteries, Fantastic Story Magazine. And there's an interesting one in here that it's. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, it's from Amazing Stories, um, and it's called I, Robot, but it's not by Clifford Simak, not by Isaac Asimov. It's Eander Binder. That was published. Should say here somewhere. I was going to say 1939. That's not quite right. It's earlier than that, I think. I can't seem to see it here. But sometime in the 30s. I don't want to take forever to try to find it. But yeah, so there is a. I think it's his first edited collection, or compile. If he didn't, he edited and compiled it. So, and then we move on to 2 volumes here, which is kind of a niche, I would say. Let me see, get volume 1 here first of all. Yeah, volume 1. It's science fiction in old San Francisco, history of the movement from 1854 to 1890 by Sam Moskowitz. And this was published by Donald M. Grant in 1980. And it's literally a history. It's volume 1 of science fiction in old San Francisco is a documented history of a lost science fiction and fantasy movement which originated on the West Coast during the latter half of the 19th century. Special emphasis is given to its prime mover, Robert Duncan Milne, who produced at least 60 stories of science fantasy over a 20-year period during which he enjoyed an unprecedented popularity. Detailed accounts are also given to the lives and extraordinary works of William Henry Rhodes, W.C. Morrow, Emma Frances Dowson, and Ambrose Bierce. The role played by the editors and publishers of the San Francisco newspapers, including William Randolph Hearst, San Francisco Examiner, and regional magazines, is also recorded. The result is a remarkable insight and understanding of an influential, however forgotten movement of American science fantasy. Science fiction in old San Francisco is the result of years of research in the genre's most foremost authority and historian, Sam Moskowitz. The illustration is by Ned Dameron on the cover, the jacket. And volume 2 of this, which they could have all put it in one volume because they're not huge. They're like 200 and some pages each. Yeah, they could have done it just over 500 pages. This is Into the Sun and Other Stories by Robert Duncan Milne. It's illustrated by Ned Dameron all throughout, and you can see the frontispiece there, and the cover again. It's a bit different, and the back of the jacket. This is also 1980, and it's got a number of stories. Into the Sun, Argonaut, November 18th, 1892, Plucked from the Burning, Argonaut. These are all from Argonaut, by the looks of it. I'm not sure if that's a magazine or a newspaper. I can't remember. But a number of them are all from like 1880s, 1891 is the newest, so 1882 to 1891. And there you go. It's just a fabulous artwork. If you can see it properly, bloody glare. Okay, now the next one is Under the Moons of Mars, and that might sound familiar to you, or to many. It's a history and anthology of scientific romance in the Muncie magazines 1912 to 1920, edited and with a history by Sam Moskowitz. And it lists the contents on the back. It's kind of nice. It's on cream paper with yellow staining on the top. And this was Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston, New York, Chicago, and San Francisco, published in 1970. And it's got Under the Moons of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs from the All Story magazine, February, July 1912. Darkness and Dawn by George Allen England, The Cavalier and the Scrapbook, January 20th, 1912. Polaris of the Snows by Charles B. Stilson, All Story Weekly, December 18th, 1915 to January 1st, 1916. Polos of the Dog Star Pack by J.U. Geisy, All Story Weekly, 1918. Friend Island by Francis Stevens, All Story Weekly, 1918. The Moon Pool by A. Merritt, 1918. The Girl in the Golden Atom by Ray Cummings, 1919. The Mad Planet by Murray Leinster, 1920. The Blind Spot by Austin Hall and Homer Eon Flint, Argosy All Story Weekly, 1921. And then there's a history of scientific romance in Muncie magazines from about 200 plus pages of the history in here. Yeah, and it says, when Edgar Rice Burroughs' Glorious Adventure Under the Moons of Mars was published by the All Story magazine in 1912, it sparked the trend towards an entirely new science fiction genre, the scientific romance, or science fiction with a strong love interest. In this anthology, Sam Moskowitz, one of the world's foremost science fiction authorities, brings together for the first time 9 of the best scientific romance stories. In addition to the title pieces, Mr. Burroughs, the collection includes, and the ones I mentioned. And it must have been in his contract to say that he's the foremost scholar, sort of science fiction. He was one of the few that were around at the time and doing quality stuff, even though he has been he was criticized at the time. I don't know that much. He might have been extremely right wing. He had controversial ideas, I think, in science fiction for science fiction, as well as just general ideas. Here's another one, Science Fiction by Gaslight, A History and Anthology of Science Fiction in Popular Magazines, 1891 to 1911, edited by Sam Moskowitz. So he's got Samuel Moskowitz on some and Sam Moskowitz on others. And this was published by the World Publishing Group in 1968. And it's got a whole host of stories. It's got a history of popular magazines, an essay at the beginning. Got the Thames Valley Catastrophe by Grant Allen. I'll just name sort of the publications he uses: the Strand magazine, the Idler, Pearson's magazine, Everybody's magazine, the Argosy, the Strand magazine again, Metropolitan magazine, the New Broadway magazine, the Red Book magazine, the Blue Book magazine, Strand again, Red Book, Pearson's, Strand, Argosy, Hampton's magazine, the Black Cat, the Ludgate Monthly, and yeah, just but there's duplication of many of them. And it says here, in the year 1891 ushered in the year 1891 ushered in a golden age of magazines, continuing up to the onset of World War One. This period saw an unparalleled flourishing of high-quality general interest magazines at a price nearly everybody could afford. Science fiction stories played a crucial role in the success of these magazines, and not surprisingly, within the pages of the Strand, Pearson's magazine, the Blue Book, Hampton's magazine, the Argosy, the Red Book, the Black Cat, and similar publications can be found some of the finest treasures of science fiction writing. From these popular magazines of 1891 to 1911, Sam Moskowitz has gathered together 26 superb stories by such masters of the genre as Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Robert Barr, William Hope Hodgson, and many other important, though less well-known figures. Even the most widely read of science fiction buffs will find stories in this collection that are new to them. Most of the stories have never been before anthologized. Extensive introductory material to the book and to each story surveys the popular magazines of the day and highlights the role that science fiction played in their successes. It provides insights into the circumstances that created the magazines, the times in which they were published, and the special rivalries existed among their publishers, and offer background information about the science fiction writers whose stories appear in this book. Never before has there been an in depth critical survey of the popular magazines of 1891 to 1911 and the fiction of these magazines produced. So, yeah, and that's this one here again. Beautiful cover. Now, those were the edited, like compilation, but histories as well. Another one is there is. I'm not sure which one is the correct order. I'll do them in the order here that they were published, and I always forget. Yeah, so this is the first one. It's called Explorers of the Infinite, Shapers of Science Fiction by Sam Moskowitz. Published 1963, I think it was. Yeah, 1963 by the World Publishing Group, and there's Sam Moskowitz on the back. And these are sort of little biographies, little assessments of writers, science fiction writers. And these ones are all sort of older writers, like, I mean, like 19th century and early 20th century. He's got Cyrano de Bergerac, The Swordsman of Space, The Sons of Frankenstein, The Prophetic Edgar Allan Poe, Fabulous Fantast, Fritz James O'Brien, Around the Worlds with Jules Verne, The Real Earth Satellite Story, Ghosts of Prophecies Past, or Frank Reed. I've already sort of did a little bit of this before. These books, and yeah, they're, like I said, almost potted biographies a little bit and assessments. And the next one is The Seekers of Tomorrow, also a World Publishing Company, 1966. And this one has Isaac Asimov in it, as well as Clifford Simak. And is he in this one? No, he's not in either of these. I thought, yeah, there's Isaac Asimov, E. Smith, John W. Campbell, Murray Leinster, Edmund Hamilton, Jack Williamson, Superman, with John Wyndham, Eric Frank Russell, and L. Sprague de Camp. And he's been, Moskowitz has been, as I say, he there was controversy at the time about his writings, and since then they've re-looked at his stuff and found some of the source material lacking. I still like the material because during the 60s, 50s, well, especially the 60s with these, it was the only place to go to find out information. A lot of the essays that are in those two volumes were first tried, in a sense, in amazing stories during the late 50s, early 60s. Under, I forget what her name was, the editor at the time. I've got a few issues here around that have the biographies in, like John Wyndham is in one of them. The last one here that I have to hand is Strange Horizons, The Spectrum of Science Fiction by Sam Moskowitz. And there's the contents there. And this is Charles Scribner's Sons, 1976. And let's see here. It's been well known that science fiction writers have predicted many technical inventions, but what about their prophecies for great social, religious, and psychological changes? This fascinating investigation analyzes and comments on subjects as wide-ranging and timely as religion, anti-Semitism, civil rights, crime, women's liberation, birth control, war, youth, psychiatry, unexplained phenomenon. The results are sometimes dramatic. Science fiction as a barometer of man's subconscious desire for war is raised. The acceptance of science fiction as a means of promoting faith by religious groups seems at odds with the ancient debate of science versus religion. Science fiction's obsession with Freud and other schools of psychiatry adds an entirely new dimension to the literature. And there he is again on the back flap. And this one, I am not sure. I've read sections of it, but yeah, definitely not all of it. But he is. I do enjoy him, even so. It's older material. I enjoy his writing. I think he's a very good writer. Uh, and most of these came out in paperback, so there are paperback reissues around. Probably all out of print now, though. And I'd like to get more of his edited material. Like I say, I've got When Women Rule is another one. That was done in the early 70s, I think. It's an interesting collection. Most of his edited material came out in paperback, so they're in really rough shape. But he did do an introduction, which I want to get, from a 1963 or so version of, it's one of the Empire novels. I think I want to say Pebble in the Sky by Isaac Asimov, that he did an introduction to, which I never knew existed. I only came across that a while ago, but it was a paperback, so I'm going to have to track that down, because I'd be interested to see, or get a copy or something like that, or photocopy of the introduction, because I've already got the book, so that's maybe the way to go for that, if I can't get a cheap copy of the book. But anyway, that's episode. I think that was number 20. Next time, what are we going to do? Oh yes, next time I'm going to show a few more reference ones that are purely reference, that you don't sit and read from cover to cover. I look at all these as reference, but I did the John Clute science fiction fantasy one, and science no this John Clute Encyclopedia of Fantasy, and John Clute's Encyclopedia and Peter Nichols of science fiction. And I've got a few other things that are sort of along those lines, that are worth having if anybody is interested. So that'll be the next installment, and I'll see you next time. Book 2.